Welcome to another episode of the Growth Design Podcast. In today's episode, we speak with Ben Shih. Ben started with a computer science background and then got interested in design while taking a web design course in college. He went on to study human-computer interaction and design. Initially, he worked as a UX developer, doing both design and front-end coding before deciding to focus solely on design. He worked at many startups before joining Localize, where he's currently the lead product designer for growth. Now, in this episode, we explored what growth design is all about, from using data, experimentation, and testing to optimize getting users to the core value of a product as quickly as possible, and how growth design differs from core product design. We explored some common onboarding mistakes that companies make, such as overusing tooltips, landing users on empty states with no guidance, and asking for payments before demonstrating value. Now, this episode is for anyone looking to grow as a designer, because we go also more than just growth design, but also talk about assessing your skills against a skill matrix, envisioning your ideal future roles and working backwards, and how you can overall begin to solve problems for yourself that can also help others. Now, before we get into the show, we'd like to spotlight a partner, the Growth Design School. This is a comprehensive 5-week course to help you jumpstart your professional growth design knowledge and empower you as well as your team to elevate to the next level of success. So, if this interests you, use our unique code GrowthDesignPod10 for a 10% discount towards the fall class of 2024. Now let's get into the show. Hi Ben, lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. Happy to be here.
I'm here with my co-host Emmanuel.
Hi guys, good to be here again.
So Ben, I've read your articles, I've read your thought pieces online, and it's just great to have you here with us. Thank you for coming on the show. And yeah, to get started, I'm curious, can you please introduce yourself? Let's go back to the beginning. Before design happened, who was Ben? What were you up to? And then what was your journey into design?
Sure. So I actually initially did not start as a designer. So I actually came from a background of computer science. So I did my undergraduate in computer science. But then at some point, I think was the second year of my undergraduate, I did a course called web design. And then in the course, I am the only person over there. I'm the only student basically that takes care of design. Like everyone else is taking care of the code quality, the algorithm, and everything that's not design related. And there are I still remember there's a classmate sitting beside me and he's designing a website that has a button that it's it's 50% large of the entire website. And I was like, oh my god, that is not something that I want to ship out, right? So I spent a lot of time in designing the website, and then as a result I almost failed that course because I spent so much time on the design and not on the code quality, where the entire purpose of that course is teaching you how to write the code for the website. So then that's the first time where I learned, okay, maybe computer science is not the best thing that I want. I do enjoy building things, but at the same time I also take care of user problems, and I want to build something that is really solving problem, right? So then after the course, and one of the summer in my undergraduate, I did a internship in UI UX design, where I started learning about what is UI, what is UX, what is user experience, and how to do user research basically. So that sort of inspired me a little bit, which made me to do a course that is called Interaction Design in my final year of my undergraduate. And that course was really inspiring for me. I had a professor, he's actually a visually impaired person. So he actually cannot see stuff, but he is a designer. And he really inspired me with, designing a lot of different things that's really solving problem for all the visually impaired persons, like how to let them write easier, how to let them, type on the keyboard easier. So that really inspired me a lot, which made me want to study a master's degree in human-computer interaction design. So I went to study human-computer interaction design in Netherlands and in Sweden, and that sort of started my design career. Of course, it's not as straightforward as I wanted, because I came from a computer science degree and then I studied design, and in between I also did a lot of machine learning course, a lot of data course. So I actually started as someone who mixed up all these skills. So I started as a UX developer where I was like designing stuff and then coding front end as well, until at some point I realized, okay, these are three different disciplines, so I need to pick one. And then I picked design, started freelancing, contracting, and then eventually moved into working as an in-house designer for a company in Taiwan, which is my home country. And then a year after, I moved to Localize, where I'm at right now.
Oh, it's an amazing journey, to be honest. And I think you belong to the unicorn group of designers where with the whole niche of design engineering started to really evolve and grow. I'm curious, you talked about then your realization that these were different disciplines and you needing to pick one. Now that you know that design engineering is a thing, which I imagine is just a different way for describing UX developers in a way, right? What are your thoughts about that whole unicorn status and how designers are like, it's that pressure back and forth, or do I need to learn to code or should I stick with design? That back and forth. From your perspective, you can do both.
This is a very good question, and I think that totally worth a new episode just to talk about this because it's a big topic. Well, first of all, I think unicorn is a big word, right? When you're saying designer, you are a unicorn designer, it feels like you need to be proficient in every single skills. While I believe like in a lot of cases, for example, should designer learn how to code? I think you definitely don't need to be like proficient. You don't need to have a degree level of coding skill in code. But I think as a good designer should have some sort of level understanding of technical stuff, right? Or the coding logic, just so that it helps you to communicate with your stakeholders easier. Because I think the more senior you get in design, the more it's about managing stakeholders and communicating with your stakeholders, which if you got the chance to know, for example, data, business metrics, engineering, even marketing, or even stuff that they are discussing, your leaders are discussing in the investor meetings, then there is more way that you can show your impact in the company and show your interest in those topics as well and communicate with your stakeholders about it. That's my thoughts right now.
No, that's okay. And yes, I think I'm also of the same school of thoughts where no one's asking you to be necessarily proficient and be like, oh, you've got to be an expert developer. But I think it definitely helps make your life and the lives of the people you work with better if you as a designer can at least understand the fundamentals of coding. Okay, which you talked about the metrics and data. So I guess that brings us then into our niche of growth design nicely. So how did you find growth design? Was it when you applied to Localize? And what was it that sparked curiosity about growth design for you?
That's a very good question. I actually learned growth design from one of my mentor in my earlier career. His name is Andy Butt. He's an investor, and I think he's also a co-organizer of UX London, which is probably the biggest conference in the UK right now. I basically went to him and I showed him my portfolio, and it was originally just want to get his feedback on my portfolio, right? My design portfolio. And then after he looked at it, he was like, I think you fit growth design role really well. So then I started, becoming curious about what is growth design and started digging into it. And then I see, growth design is basically merging a lot of data mindset as well as a lot of testing mindset, where you want to test a lot of stuff, you want to experiment a lot of stuff, and you want to ship things faster in order to learn faster from your users, right? And that really aligns with the way that I think about design. And I'm not sure if it's because I've worked for a lot of smaller startups where I really don't have the chance. I did not have the chance to stay with the project for for example, doing research for 6 months and then designing it for another year and then shipping it out the year after. I really did not have the chance to do so. And because in my experience, it's always okay, let's ship out this idea in 1 to 2 weeks. We see if users are using it. If not, let's change the idea and then we ship something else, right? And then I really like that way of thinking about design because we are really gathering our own data, right? You're not just doing user research. You're not of course, doing user research, you're still gathering data, but then it's only when you ship to the market, you're getting real data, right? You are getting information on whether users are actually using it or paying it or not. So I think it's really that mindset that inspired me to get more into growth design and eventually started doing a lot of courses in, for example, growth design. And then I also recently just came out from the Growth Design School, which the Growth Design community organized, and doing a lot of courses in Reforge as well, which is like a very popular growth learning source. And that's basically how I got into it.
How would you explain to someone who perhaps is curious about growth design and has no clue, what's the difference between growth product design and core product design?
So there are a few things that we can talk about over here, right? First is 99% of the time, product design is to design the core value of the product, right? So if you're designing for Spotify, you're probably designing the music player experience or the search experience or the profile experience, right? While growth design, 99% of the time, again, is to design how to help your user to get to that value as soon as possible. Right. And if you look at the other way around, product design is mostly about product development, while growth design a lot of time is about product adoption, right? And in product design, the goal is most of the time, the goal is to ship out a feature, right? It's ship out a product. While in growth design, your goal is most of the time is to optimize for something. Right, you want to get your users to use your product, you want to get your user to reach a certain point, and you want to learn as well. Like one of the goals for growth design is also to learn more about your users and try to experiment, try to do A/B tests, try to do whatever you can do to learn from users so that you can know how to bring them from zero to the value of your product as soon as possible. And of course, there are some more details, like product design mostly rely on qualitative research, while growth design rely a lot on quantitative research. And also for different growth design team, depends on company. Growth design could report to different person or to a different or sit within a different team, right? While product design most of the time sit within the product team or having or belongs to the product house, right? And report to maybe, you might have a head of product design, but most of the time your head of product design also reports to a product person, right? While for growth design, sometimes it could be reporting to a marketing person, to someone from GTM site. Yeah, so I think those are mainly the differences.
I definitely appreciate how you've been able to give clear differences between both experiences. Now, I'm curious about this. So before we define what user onboarding is, right, you will see sometimes like you're probably scrolling through portfolios of different designers, and you can see case studies that are formed around user onboarding, and they are more core product, from a more core product design perspective. And we also know that that same case study, give it to a growth designer, it will be approached in a different way. Now, can you, in that context, help us understand what does user onboarding mean for growth designers, and how important is that perspective to the product customer lifecycle?
Wow, this is another big question. If you have ever done Reforge course, you probably learn or even, look through their content and their blog posts. You probably learn they always emphasize retention is the king for your product, right? When you're developing a product, you're always aiming for a higher retention rate, because if you have a 0% retention rate, let's say nobody come back to your product in 30 days, there's no way that you need to put your resource into advertisement or anything else, right? Because you bring people in and then they left, like everyone leave. So retention is important. And then we also know that the number one thing that's relevant to retention is onboarding. Like the faster that you can bring your user from sign up to building your habit loop within your product, which is they experience the aha moment of your product, as many as possible and as quick as possible, the more likely that you will bring them to come back to your product in the future. And that means like a higher retention rate, right? So that is basically how important is onboarding. Like if you don't have a good enough onboarding, then your user basically won't even know how to use your product, right? Thinking about, again, Spotify, if you sign up to Spotify and then if you land to Spotify with a empty page and they have nothing over there, where you don't even know how to start or how to search for a song, then you will never go back to the app again, right? While if you have a good onboarding, well, like if Spotify asks for, what kind of music do you like the most? Who are the singers that you enjoy, listening the most? And then inside Spotify, when you land into Spotify, it already recommends you all the songs that interest you. That's like a whole different story, right? You would start playing and then you would start going back to the product. So that is basically how important is user onboarding. And that is also exactly the reason why when we started growth team at Localize, the first thing that we do is to improve the onboarding, because we know this is the number one thing that we should care about if we want to increase our retention.
So you've just mentioned that one of the first things that you identified was that the user onboarding needed to be fixed at Localize. So just based off of that, then can you describe to us like the process that you use to identify or analyze your onboarding flow, and then how did you identify the areas that needed to be improved, and finally how did you then prioritize which aspects? How did you focus on what aspects to prioritize?
So maybe before answering your question, just for some background, right? So 2 years ago at Localize, we actually already had a growth team where I'm not part of. And then in between, we have some, restructuring within the company. So we disassembled that growth team. And then 6 months ago, we restarted the growth team again. But then the previous growth team actually defined the habit moment, a metric in Localize where we believe, okay, when user hit a certain metric within Localize, when they sign up, highly correlates with the retention that they will come back to reuse Localize again and again. And they have that definition, right? So when we restarted our growth team, we basically look back into the definition, we look at the number, and then realize our retention, or not even retention, but the habit moment, like the number of people that got into from sign up and got into that habit moment, it's a really, really low number. So then we started digging more into it, and then we actually did a few things. So the first thing that we start when we analyzed the entire onboarding, actually, well, first of all, like that is basically why we started doing this onboarding redesign, right? Because we learned that, okay, we have a problem with a low habit moment metric, and then that clearly correlates with the retention metric as well, right? So that's why we started realizing that, okay, we need to work on this onboarding redesign. And there are a few steps that we did to redesign the entire onboarding. So the first thing that we did is to dog food ourselves. So basically what I did is we asked all of our designers, and don't ask why like it's designer doing this, but I basically asked all of our designers to go through the onboarding of Localize, and then with every one of us, we'll basically, we take screenshots of all the problems that we see within the onboarding. We also started commenting on, what are the things that you like, what are the things that you don't like, what are the things that you think you can improve. And then we started gathering, these evidence from ourselves, right? At least to get a feeling of what's wrong with our onboarding and why is people not completing our onboarding as we expected. And then after we got all the evidence, after we got all the pain points that we gathered ourselves, I started digging into data as well, or we started digging into data as well with our data analysts as well, to see, okay, how much of our assumption correlates with the data that we are seeing, right? And then also trying to identify, okay, from the onboarding funnel, where are the biggest drops? And that is from the quantitative side, right? But we also started at the same time talking to users as well to understand, okay, when you are not passing through this step, what are the questions that you're asking yourself? What are the reason why you don't like this step, right? So then we started matching like the quantitative data with qualitative data to get a big picture of what's going on with our onboarding. And that's basically how we started. And then for the design phase, we also did a few things. First of all, since we are a new growth team, I realized that maybe we should start designing by, having a team activity to brainstorm together. So the first thing that I did was to propose having a design sprint week, where we basically sit together for an entire week to propose idea to fix the onboarding together. So that's basically what we did, right? So in that week, we basically present all the data that we gather from quantitative studies, prioritize all the problems that we see in the onboarding based on how much impact that they will make for the onboarding. And then everyone basically started sketching. I had my data analyst sketching some ideas. I had my engineers start sketching some ideas about onboarding. And then we basically, in the end, combine all the ideas that we have and then start testing with users on whether this onboarding idea makes sense. I think it's worth mentioning one mistake that we did is we did not set much constraint for ourselves when we were doing that workshop, and that means when we are proposing those ideas, we wasn't taking timeline into consideration, right? So we really came up with a lot of cool ideas and crazy ideas that it's cool in one case, right? Because you can get all the ideas out, but at the same time, it's not realistic for us to deliver within 1 quarter. So then we started looking into data again, and we started looking into all the experiments that the previous growth team did, and started learning, what are the biggest drop in the funnel that will give us the most opportunity. And for our case, that is in product onboarding part, because we realize, first of all, just as a heads up, Localize is a very complicated product. It's hardly for any users to start using Localize without any sort of facilitation from our side. So that's how important is onboarding in our case. And we realized, and in the original onboarding that we had, is when the users sign up and when they land into Localize, they get a model, so a pop-up with a checklist, right? So to show them, you need to do this, you need to do that, and then lastly, you need to do this. The first thing that we realize when we do the research with customers is the first thing that they do is that they close the model and then they start asking, how do I use this product? And then we were like, you can just interact with the checklist, right? And then you know how to use the product. But they're like, I don't want to interrupt my view. That is basically our observation, right? And we realized that's probably the part that will give us the most impact, because, from previous data, we also see no matter how much questions that we add or reduce within the sign-up flow, it does not really affect the final habit moment metric that we are seeing. So that's why we put our bet in the in-product onboarding part, where we propose to actually redesign that model a bit to become a checklist that is more a passive checklist, that it's like only showing when user needs it and they can close it when they don't need it, and then it shows up again when they need it, right? Which is more, first of all, more contextual. Second, it's a more passive approach where, if you're a user that knows Localize or knows localization better than others, then you probably don't need the support from a checklist, right? And for new users, of course, you can just go to the passive checklist one by one, and then you'll be able to learn how to use Localize.
I do love the mix of qualitative and quantitative data, and I love that you use that in combination with like historical data and experiments from previous team, and just like the dog food in. I feel like all of these things are key hallmarks of what you need to look out for when you're working within growth. But then there are two ways my question will evolve, right? The first one is that on the growth team part, you working with a new team now, you mentioned establishing new collaboration rituals, right? What are the things did you propose to just help you get into that collaborative and gain the stakeholder trust and relationship within the new growth team?
That's a really good question. So whenever I join a new team or a new company, almost the first thing that I always propose is to have a workshop, because within the workshop, it's really the place where you can have enough time to know each other, right? You can have a lot of ice-breaking activities. You can, basically, if you sit together for an entire week, every day you can literally spend like 15 to 30 minutes to have an icebreaker to know each other better, right? And then within the workshop, especially for growth team, you can also educate others on how important it is to constantly throw out your ideas to each other, right? And then we can debate, and then we can figure out together as a team what are the ideas that we want to ship, right? And that is, I believe, the most important thing for the growth team, right? Where everyone in the team is constantly looking into problems, proposing ideas, and then we discuss, we measure the impact, the effort, and then we ship, right? And then we learn from the market. And that is basically what you can, not sure if train is the right word, but that is basically how you can train your team members in the team to, start adopting this habit, right? And also letting them know that, growth team is all about these kind of solving problems, proposing ideas, and discussing, right? While for other product teams, sometimes engineers especially might not have that much space to propose ideas. For growth team, this is really the place where like everyone, even marketing people or other stakeholders outside of the team, can join and propose their ideas, and then we'll basically evaluate it and ship it, right? So those are, I won't say that is reasonable because it's not happening every week, right? Because like if we have workshop every week, we probably won't have time to work on anything else. But I think that's a good start. And then from time to time, of course, if you can have workshops or brainstorming sessions just to gather thoughts from different people and throw ideas, I think that's a good approach.
I definitely love that. So now to go back to the onboarding business, right? When you recently wrote an article in collaboration with ATP List, and it was about user onboarding, and I absolutely enjoyed reading through the entire article. I'd say, what was the most surprising find for you when you analyzed over 20 onboarding flows across various industries? What patterns or trends did you notice that were quite surprising?
There are a few things, well, maybe a couple of things, right? First is if you go through the sign up for example, Google or Gmail or Facebook, you'll probably realize one thing, which is the sign up process looks exactly the same as 15 years ago. Which makes sense because if you are having a product that, I'm not sure about the user base of Facebook, but I imagine like more than 50% of the population on this earth is using Facebook right now, or some sort of number like that. It probably makes sense for them to not invest that much time in onboarding, right? But I think like being a tech giant, that also influenced how other people think about onboarding, right? I remember like a few years ago when I was contracting for a company and I was, proposing to design some onboarding. I was proposing to change UX. The product manager told me, why do we need to do this if like Facebook, Snapchat are not investing their time in UX? Like they still get a bunch of users. And I was like, yes, but there are Facebook, there are Snapchat.
You're not them.
Yes, we are not them. So the reason why I'm talking about this is I feel like those tech giants still have some sort of influence on these startup people, right? Or some people, which make them think that onboarding is not important. So that is one finding that I found, right? Like most of the big companies just don't have onboarding or just feel like they don't need to invest any time into designing a better onboarding. Second thing is I think a lot of onboarding is about educating users on how to use your product, where I don't believe any user will want to use a product to learn how to use your product, right? They are coming to your product in order to solve their issue, right? Solve a problem. If you, again, Spotify example, if you go to Spotify, you're probably not learning how to interact with the music player and, know how to click the button over here, but it's there to listen to music, right? And I think in the book that Wes Bush wrote, which is Product-Led Onboarding, he emphasized a concept which is onboarding is not about educating users, but it's about upgrading your users, right? When your users go through your onboarding, finish your onboarding, they should really have a feeling that I'm now upgraded because of your product. And I think that is the two main surprises that I'm seeing from most products. Like one is most people just don't care about onboarding. Second is even if some people cares about onboarding, most of them are about educating users on how to use their product.
Okay, so now, which then brings us in your own experience and perhaps how you've then upgraded the onboarding experience at Localize. What are the key components of what a successful onboarding looks like, especially when your focus is ensuring that there's a habit that's formed in the product?
So there are a few things, right? First of all, you always need to make sure that your user are reaching their main job speed done. Right, so for the case of Localize, we need to make sure that the user comes to Localize because they need to localize some sort of product or a document, right? So we need to make sure that our onboarding is as easy as possible to help them to get from sign up to translate your content as fast as possible and as easy as possible. I think that is the core component of every single onboarding, right? And then no matter how much personalization you add, no matter how much stuff you add, the goal is always to make sure that you are guiding your users from 0 their main jobs to be done as soon as possible and as easy as possible, right? And then for users to form a habit loop, there are of course different ways to do so, but I think if you have read the book from Near EOS, I think it's called Hooked, which is basically about habit loop. I think that is basically the core components of how to make users form a habit using your product, right? So when they come to a product, there's always a trigger in their mind, right? It's either internal trigger or external trigger. External trigger is easy. It's basically clicking that get started button or an ad on Facebook, but internal trigger is most of the case where they want to come to a product, right? Because like internal trigger is more related to emotion, right? I'm bored. I'm not happy with my existing product. I am, sad about something. I'm bored because I want to go to YouTube. And then you provide them with an action to go to YouTube and they start, doing something into it. You provide them with a reward, where it's basically in YouTube, think about your first time YouTube user, right? You come to YouTube, you see all the video over there, you click on it, and then you get some sort of reward, which is, okay, this is, a funny video. I'm not bored anymore. And then you start investing more time into it because you started searching, you started looking into other videos, and then that is eventually started building a loop again and again, right? And that is how habit loop will be formed, basically.
All right. I feel like that now has answered my next question about how do you form a happy loop. So thank you. So in your work at Localize, how have you then balanced that need for guiding new users versus allowing them to explore independently within the product? I know you've talked about the complexity of the product itself. You mentioned things around like contextual triggers as a way for them to be able to actively engage when they perhaps reach a point. Yeah, just talk to us a bit more about that. How do you balance that need for them to be independent but also needing guidance?
Well, first thing, right, as I mentioned, it's hardly for any users to know how to use Localize without some sort of facilitation, either within the product or from our sales team. Right? So this is basically our assumption when we're designing that onboarding, right? But then we also know, maybe there are some people that are more familiar with localization software in general, or maybe they have used Localize before. And for those people, they definitely don't need onboarding to help them. They maybe need some sort of more advanced tutorial at some point, but some basic onboarding on how to upload your document, how to translate, how to download them, it's probably not needed. So I don't think we done it the best within Localize, but what we do is when they land into Localize, the first thing that they will see is, okay, congrats on creating your first project, right? Do you want to learn more about Localize? Where we will basically provide them with a checklist where they can go through it one by one and then know how to use the product. Or the second button over there is to skip onboarding. So for people that prefer to use the product on their own, they can still have an option to skip onboarding, and then they will be able to skip the entire checklist, right? Of course, that doesn't mean that we are just dropping them into Localize and not caring about them. We still have some onboarding emails. We still have, for example, intercom pop up from time to time where when we detect that they are idling, or when we found that they are struggling with something, or when we detect that they're not interacting, they're not coming back to Localize for a few days, then we will send some emails to check in whether there's something wrong with the platform or if they are looking for something else. But that's basically our approach right now.
Now, off the back of that, then, if you were able to share, is there an experiment that has been successful just because you did your due diligence with the data, right? And could you share that experience with us where data led to a significant result for you?
So one of the things, for example, when we were looking into the onboarding data is in the sign up, after the user fill in their email, their password, their company information, their goal that they want to achieve with Localize, we prompt them a page to create their first project, right? Because we know that's the first thing that you need to do when you come into Localize. You need to create a project, you need to upload something, and then you'll only be able to translate after that, right? So the first thing that we need to prompt the user is ask them to create a project. Now, a big problem with it is we have a 4-step in the sign up for them to create a project. The first step is create a project, which is add a project name. Second step is select the languages that you want to translate your project into, which makes sense. Third step is add your first key, where while I'm describing that, you probably don't understand, and that's the problem with onboarding. And the fourth step is to select a platform, which you probably, again, don't understand because it's our terminology, right? Not a new user terminology. So when we look at the data, we realize there's a clear drop between the second and the third step and between the third step and the fourth step. So then one of the first experiment that our team did is to remove the last two steps, right? So basically ask user to fill in just your project name and then fill in the languages that they want to translate into. Adding the first key, selecting a platform, we internally know that is very important for a localization project, right? But for new users, we believe that's not the most important thing for them. So we basically remove those two steps. And then, of course, right now it was removed 2 months ago. So I won't say that we have any significant results yet, but at least right now we're seeing an increase of 5% already, which I think is actually a good number on completing the sign up.
That's impressive. You mentioned something about terminology, which I think is so easy to overlook the fact that new users are not familiar with the way we speak about a product. Are there other areas in which you've perhaps seen that terminology, and it doesn't even have to be just localized now, just other products that you did your analysis on, for example, that where you could see clearly that terminology was becoming a thing? I think I can give you a bit of context. So I worked at a fintech startup previously, and obviously because it's fintech, there are terminologies that you can absolutely not avoid, also as a result of like compliance issues and things like that. But the problem oftentimes with those kind of things is that they are terminologies that users are not familiar with, but then you're required by law to use those things. I know that's not necessarily the scenario here, but my question, I guess, is that when it comes to terminology, have you seen those in other products where you perhaps as the user have been wondering, what exactly does this mean? And yeah, just curiosity about it. And does it actually prompt you to go looking for what that term means, or has it caused you to churn off the product?
That's the thing. It's exactly what you mentioned, right? I never really need to look up for, maybe there are some cases where, like, for example, when I was using Photoshop 10 years ago, I do need to look up what each tool there means, right? But then right now, I think in most of the cases, as long as the product is, first of all, matching the way that you think about what the product can help you with, you will naturally got used to the terminology and naturally start using it, right? I think Figma is a good example. Like things like auto layout, things like cursor chat, things like, maybe not comments, but there are a lot of terminologies that Figma introduced, right? And we as a designer, I don't think we ever need to learn what cursor means or what auto layout means. Like, we just started using it because it solved one of our problems, right? Why is the reason why we started using auto layout is because you can structure things easier, right? You can place thing in a grid, you can place thing in different layout, horizontal layout, vertical layouts easier. And that's how we started learning it. And do we question about why they name it that way? I don't think we did, right? And same for Miro. I think they also introduced a lot of different terminologies over there, but we never need to really dig into it. And I think as long as your product is really solving your user needs, the terminology, I don't think it really matters. Maybe it matters in some 5%, 10% cases where the better you name your product, but the better you name your features, maybe it more is aligned with the users, how to say, the cognitive
Mental model?
Yeah, the mental model. But yeah, in most of the cases, I do feel like it, maybe I'm wrong, but from my experience, I don't think it really that much matters with onboarding in general.
But I guess it's just also potentially something to be mindful of, that onboarding perhaps is not the place to also introduce a lot of jargon that are specific to the industry.
Exactly. It's like linking back to what Westbush says, right? Like the goal with onboarding is not to educate users about the terminology about your product, but it's to upgrade them, right? And then only after you build the habit loop with your users, they start using your product again, then you can introduce all the features that you introduce, all the fancy namings, and to make them even more upgraded, right? At least that's my thought. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you.
All right, I've been here listening and really enjoying the conversation. Honestly, I've learned a lot. Just keep scribbling down and just writing a couple of notes. I think based on the last question, I think that's where I was just coming a little bit. It's about users understanding terminology and everything, but I'm gonna come from the aspect of personalization. I know one of the biggest challenge in terms of onboarding a user to them achieving or reaching the habit zone, right? It's about understanding who this user has, like what is their problem. You can't control the type of users that come to your product. So how important is personalization to the success of an onboarding flow?
Think about, again, the Spotify example, right? So if you sign up to Spotify, and then they literally land you to a place where they recommend you tons of music and singers from a culture or from a country or from a region that you never have experience with, or you never listen to that type of music. Would you start using Spotify? You probably won't, right? Because you are just seeing like a bunch of musics that you're not familiar with, and then your mental model will probably tell you this is not the best product for you, right? Well, compared to if you have a proper sign up process that asks who are your favorite users, or maybe not even that, right? Let's say YouTube, where they don't have any sign up process, right? You basically go to youtube.com without an account and you're still able to see content, right? But at least they are able to recommend the content. Of course, if you have a sign up creation process, that's even better, because you can ask user, what are the videos that you're interested in, what are the topics that you are interested in, and then you can start recommending them videos or music based on what they selected over there, right? And then, but I think personalization as a whole have a higher chance for users to get to their aha moment, or get to their, like, linking back to what I said earlier, right? When users come to your product, there's always a problem that they want to solve, right? They come to YouTube because they are bored, maybe, and they want to watch a video. And then the aha moment is when they watch a video that they really like, and then they will watch another video. And personalization is basically a shortcut way for you to get from sign up to that step as soon as possible, right? And of course, you can do even more things with personalization after they hit the aha moment, right? Once you know, for example, their topic, what they like, what they don't like, then you can even do more things after they form habit using your product, which is something that YouTube really likes to experiment with, right? They basically just want you to stay on YouTube as long as possible and don't want you to leave, because they know you so well that they can, try to keep you with all the content that they are recommending you with.
Great. Yeah, I like that. So I want to take you back a little bit, right, to the ADP list article that you wrote and how you analyze the 20 top companies onboarding. So what were the common mistakes? I know you've talked about things that you spot, but what were the common mistakes that you observe that some of these companies do make?
So there are a few things, right? And I think I also wrote it in the article. The number one thing is, and I think this is also the number one thing that most of the growth team do when they get started as a growth team, is to add tooltips, or to edit tooltips, or to remove tooltips, but always something around tooltips, right? And this is still something that I think is the most common mistake that most companies do, which is they feel like just by adding tooltips, users will be able to learn how to use your product, right? But then linking back again to Westbush, you are educating your users with tooltips. You're not solving any problem for them, right? And why would they even click on the tooltip if everything that they're seeing over there is just about learning how to use your product, right? In the article that I wrote, I think I have some examples over there where I recommend you take a look at if you're listening to this. But tooltips is basically one of the most common mistakes that most companies make, right? I'm not saying tooltips is bad, because it does help your user to understand how your product works, right? But if you are prompting them with 10 tooltips, 20 tooltips, you're just adding friction to your onboarding and slowing down the chance for your users to get from sign up to aha moment, like the process from sign up to aha moment, right? So that is the first thing. Second thing is, a lot of product, when their new user land to the product, they land in a empty page, right? Where they see nothing over there. Where, of course, if you are someone that it's, let's say, a technical product, and you're someone that is technical, of course you can some sort of get started with it. You can maybe interact with your documentation or some tutorials to get started. But that is still bad, right? Because I'm landing to a page that I'm seeing nothing. And in most of the cases, I'll just close it and then I'll try other products out, especially given that right now we're having a very competitive landscape where, like, for every problem, you probably have 20 different products that can solve the problem for you. So if I land into an empty state with one product, I'll just probably close it and I will sign up for another product, right? Well, I think a good onboarding is if you like, it's clear that your user don't have any data, right? But then at least you will be able to provide some sort of, maybe if you don't have any sample data, you can even just have a dummy page where you list out the checklist, right? What is the first thing that you need to get started? I think Hotjar has a really good example where to get started with Hotjar, you will need to implement code to your website in order to keep track of the recordings, right? So the first thing that they do after a new user sign up is to prompt you with the code snippet, of course, that you can copy paste, or you can also click on one button and then you can send it to your engineers to ask them to implement, which aligns with your mental model, right? Because most of the case, probably you're a designer, you're a PM, and you need engineer to help you to implement the code. So I would say empty state or the first screen that users see is another thing that most company make mistake with. The third thing that many people might have different opinions is, I believe a lot of, especially apps or especially fitness apps, they are optimizing for getting your subscription first. So for example, if you search for fitness in App Store and then if you download any of them, the first thing that they always do is they basically ask for your information about your goal. They ask tons of questions. And then before you can even start seeing your fitness plan and everything, they ask you to subscribe. And most of the case, it's a yearly subscription that costs you probably $50 or $60, which is a huge commitment for a lot of people. And maybe that is something that they experimented and found that, it increased their revenue. But I still think, you're not solving your users any problem yet, right? And you're already asking them for a credit card, which I feel like, I'm not sure if it's a mistake, but that is at least something that me as a designer doesn't resonate with.
I was going to talk about assessing the effectiveness of an onboarding experience. Are there specific metrics to really assess your onboarding experience to know that, oh yes, this is really effective and the company is really making progress in terms of that?
This is a broad topic that requires probably another episode to explain, but I'll try to keep it short, right? So if you have done Reforge course in the past, the first thing you will do, or in the course, what they recommend you to do is to define the use case of your product, right? The use case of why anyone will want to use your product. And essentially what template asks you to do is you start defining the problem that your user facing, which can be, again, as simple as possible as, I'm bored and I want to have something because I'm bored. And then you ask, who is that user? So the persona of it, maybe it's a teenager between 15 to 20 years old. Maybe it's a female based in Amsterdam. Maybe it's a single person, unmarried, based in Japan or something. And why would they use your product to solve their problem, right? If you're developing Netflix, for example, they're bored and they probably come to Netflix because they want to see some movies so that they can be entertained, right? And then you started making an assumption around how often do the problem occurs, right? Is that person feeling bored every week or every day, every hour, every month, right? And then based on that, you started doing your quantitative analysis to support your assumption and to validate your assumption as well, to check quantitative wise, are your users coming back to your product every day, every month, or every week, right? And you try to align your quantitative data with your assumption. After you confirm the frequency, you can start doing a second layer analysis where you can try to find what action indicate that you're solving the problem for the persona. So for example, linking back to the Netflix example again, right? Let's say I'm bored. I come to Netflix. Are there any evidence from your quantitative data that can show you when they interact with a certain button in Netflix? Maybe it's a play button. Maybe it's about browsing through older recommendations. Maybe it's about adding something to the wish list. but are there any actions that indicate that you're actually solving the problem for the persona? And then you can start building like a whole analysis around those actions that you assume like it's indicating that you're solving the problem for the persona, right? And then you can start to check, from your hypothesis, which are the ones that have the highest correlation with retention. And then that will eventually become your habit moment metric, right? It could be something like, maybe it's, I'm just making an assumption for Netflix, right? Maybe it's user need to watch a movie on the first 7 days when they sign up. And then as a designer, as a PM, as a growth team, the goal is really clear, right? You basically start moving backwards from that. So in order for anyone to finish watching a movie, what you need to do, like if that's the habit moment, what is the aha moment, right? Maybe it's they need to find a movie, right? And then what is the setup moment? You probably need to find something that matches their interests so that you can recommend them the right thing. So that is one way to do so, right? After you having those metrics defined, you basically start monitoring them. And that is one way to know whether your different experimentation on onboarding will help you to set more people to aha moment or habit moment or not. That's the first way. And then there are, of course, more other traditional product design way to do so. Like, for example, you can still measure with CSAT, right? You can, pop up like a survey after user onboarding themselves, maybe 5 to 7 days, and ask them, how satisfied are you with the onboarding process? It could be as simple as that, or it could be a more qualitative survey where you ask them, are there anything that you want to know from the onboarding? Are there anything else that you feel like you're missing from the onboarding? And that could give you some data point on how you can further educate your user as well. And then the last thing that I would say is, I think it's very easy for growth team to forget about qualitative data matters, and you're always looking at quantitative data, right? So I will also say it's actually quite important to also constantly jump on calls with your customers, interview them, and to get some qualitative feedback, and that will of course guide you through designing a better onboarding as well.
I like how you really dive deep into that, even though you say it might really take someone to, it's a broad topic and maybe taking a course, but I think you've done so much justice to that in such a way that I don't really think someone might need to take a course. Just listen to this part of the, the episode and you know how to really structure your onboarding and to make it more effective, and also how to track and know the right metrics to look towards. Right, so looking at the rise of AIs and a lot of language learning models and the future of tech, how do you see user onboarding process involved with the rise of AIs and new models in terms of language learning models and all these new technologies?
Very good question. I'm not sure if I will be right, but first of all, with mobile, I think a lot of our web app application right now are still not optimized for mobile, right? If your company got the resource, they will probably recommend you to download an app when you get to a certain point in the app, right? But most of the case, they're optimizing their app only for desktop and not for mobile. Think about Figma, right? Like there's no way that you can use Figma in iPhone unless you're like testing some prototype. But at the same time, we know many people have mobile phones right now. Like 99% probably, I'm not sure about the number again, but a very high percent of people probably have smartphone right now, where it means like a lot of people, when they see your ads on maybe Instagram, on Threads, on X, on Facebook, they'll probably sign up with your mobile phone first. And then when they land to your actual product, that creates a frustration because they finish signing up and then they land to a product that they cannot use it within your phone, right? So I think that's the number one thing that your user onboarding probably need to improve, which is when your product is not optimized for a mobile, and when your user actually land in your product in a mobile, what should you do with it, right? Do you want to invest more time in developing, like maybe the most straightforward way is to develop a responsive app where people can actually use it within mobile? If that's not possible, develop an app if you got a resource to do so and to develop it separately. But at least at minimum, what you can do is, I think there are a lot of apps that do this, which is when your user lands your app on a mobile phone, you basically pop a message saying your app works the best in a desktop application, right? And then at least me as a user, I would know, okay, so this is not the normal experience that I should get if I log in as a desktop, right? And then you can try to also reduce the friction as much as possible for them to switch from mobile to desktop. For example, you can, send them a little login link that basically they can copy, and then they can log in with the same account. They don't need to fill in any information, but then they can land into your desktop app, which has a better experience, right? So that's one thing. Second thing is we have TikTok, we have YouTube Shorts, we have Instagram Reel, right? All these things, and I think there are some psychological research around this already, which is I think people are getting less and less patience about stuff. Which means, because like on TikTok, we basically, look at something and then 2 seconds we see something new, right? And because of that, I think people are losing patience. And that means if you land user to a product that they cannot see the future of it, and they cannot see that your product is solving problem for them, I think there is a higher chance and higher chance in the future that people will drop it even earlier if they don't see the future with your product. So this is something that you probably need to keep in mind of when you're designing your onboarding and even your landing page or even your ads as well, is you need to make sure that you are promising your user to solve the problem, and then you also need to show them as early as possible how you can solve it for them. Right. And then last thing about AI is I'm personally very looking forward to having, more AI incorporated into onboarding. And I think right now we are already seeing some third-party tool like Adopt that's incorporating AI into their onboarding, where users can basically type in the question regarding the product and then AI will answer, right? I think that's one way that you can use AI for facilitating your user with onboarding, right? You basically have a assistant or a sales or a customer support that is there 24/7, and they can basically interact with it to get their answer, and they can hopefully learn how to use your product to achieve their goal faster. Second thing is linking back to personalization, and throughout the episode, I think we talk about how important is personalization in onboarding, and I think with AI coming up, there's a higher chance that companies will start adopting these AI strategies to personalize the onboarding process even better, right? I think Typeform has a really good example where if you sign up with an enterprise account, so with a company account into Typeform, the first thing that they ask you to do is to type in your company URL. And then once you type in their URL, they will automatically using AI to grab the branding styles of your company, which is maybe the colors, the fonts, and then start generating the Ford template based on the styles that they detect, right? And I think that's a really good use of AI, which can basically solve users a lot of pain because they don't need to start building their template from scratch. And secondly, is to also showcase your product in a much powerful way.
That's really interesting. I think it's been a while I test the Typeform thing. I think I need to check that out because that's very, very spot on. And I also like the part of having like an AI assistant helping you through the journey of onboarding, because I know that's even one of the very big problem when it comes to onboarding users. That's really great. So moving to the last segment of the podcast, which we're going to be talking about your career as a growth designer, how to grow as a growth designer. So in terms of your professional growth as a designer, how do you prioritize your growth, or how do you grow? Let me put it that way.
It's a really good question, and it's really a tough question for me as well, because I am, I mentioned about my background, so you probably know I'm someone that likes to learn different things and likes to do different things at the same time. So when it comes to career planning, it's really a mess where I'm still learning about how to make it better. But there are a few things that I'm trying to do, which I started doing like recently in the past 1 to 2 years. One is if you search for designer skill metrics on Google, you'll probably get some sort of spreadsheets or some sort of template where you can see the list of skills that designers should have. That includes hard skills like UI skills, interaction design skills, data skills, for example, and soft skills like communicating with stakeholders, preparing documentation and stuff. And then you can start to rate yourself. How good are you at with like different skills over there, right? And then you probably won't want to be a unicorn in most cases, right? So you won't want to have like 5 out of 5 for every skill over there, because like in most of the cases that would be impossible as well. But they're based on your experience, and the more experience that you have as a designer, you probably get a stronger feeling for that. You will probably know there are a few specific skills that you want to improve, right? Maybe it's about data, right? You probably want to improve your quantitative data skill from 1 to 5 or 1 to 3, but at least you can get a understanding on where you're at right now and what you want to be in the future. That's one way to do so. And then second way to do so is, and this is being recommended a lot of time from different managers and different coaches in the past, which is imagine you're taking a time machine and you are going to like 20 years from now, right? So you're now in 2044. How would you imagine yourself to be in 2044? If you were to write a newsletter about yourself, that your bio in 2044, how would that look like, right? And then from that, you can move backwards as well. You can say, okay, 10 years from now, what I want to be, right? Or 5 years from now, what I want to be. And another way to facilitate that, you can also look into some jobs title right now on LinkedIn or on like different jobs website, where you can try to see, okay, if you want to be a director of product design, if you want to be a CPO, if you want to be, maybe even you want to change your career, right? Maybe like for whatever reason you want to be a principal software engineer. You can see the requirements over there, right? And then you can start to plan for, if you want to be a director of product design, what are the skills over there that you need to get in order to achieve that? And then you can start planning your career around that to get to that stage.
Yeah, I think that's really spot on. I think I really agree with those factors you've given. I know recently you just got promoted as the lead growth designer at Localize. What are the practical steps that you like to share that has helped you along in your journey as a designer and that also led to this new promotion?
Well, there are a few things. Let me break it down, right? So a year ago when I was chatting with my manager about my promotion, and when I asked him what I need to do in order to be promoted, one thing that he said is, in order to be a lead product designer, you not only need to excel in your own design projects, you not only need to manage your stakeholders well, but you also need to influence other designers in the organization, or even influence like other people in the organization, right? So that is something that I worked a lot in the past 6 to 12 months. And my coach, I always recall what he taught me about, influencing other, right? Like one thing that he taught me that I feel like is very useful for me is, when you are working as a designer in the team, sometimes try to solve the problem that you are facing a lot in the team, and then that will naturally solve the problem for other people as well, right? So you solve it from your own. Let's say, Figma is very unstructured and it's very hard, it's very difficult for you to find a Figma file. You basically started structuring those files, and then naturally that will influence others as well, right? You're solving also problem for others, and naturally you're influencing others as well. You're helping others as well. And that's really the mindset that I had in the last 6 to 12 months, where I'm trying to solve the small problems that I'm facing day to day. For example, one of the recent example is taking user research takes a lot of time, right? Taking user research notes, adding tags, summarizing it takes a lot of time. I basically built an AI within Localize to help people to, first of all, to summarize goals easier, to tag insights easier as well, and to get summary and to answer questions easier as well. And that is basically a little tool that is solving like a lot of my problems, and it's helping a lot of people as well. It's solving not even problems for designers, but also for PMs, for other team members in the GTM team as well. So I think that is something that it's quite useful for me, which is like, try to solve your problem, and then that will naturally solve it for other people as well, and will start influencing other people.
Great. I think I like the aspect of influencing other people. And I would also take lead from what you did, creating a very good tool, because to take user research and break it down, take out the tips, take out the juicy part of it, and able to implement it, and having to be the AI tool that can help in simplifying that task is really, really good, and I think it signifies a lot of impact. All right, so thank you so much for this section.
This has been a fantastic session with you, honestly, Ben. Thank you so much for all your answers and just being very thoughtful about how you've responded to each and every one of them. Okay.
Thank you.
So, lightning round, as the name implies, it's supposed to be quick, even though historically it hasn't, but we'll try. Um, okay. So, what are top three products that you use daily and you love?
So one is Arc. It's literally a browser. If you haven't used it, shame you. I mean, you should use it. I think it's a really good browser, and on top of a group product, they have a great team as well. Like, I love their CEO and the team behind it. You should definitely use it. The second thing is a little Mac menu bar app that is called Beams, where I'm using to keep track of my times, where I can provide the link in the show notes so that you can download it as well. But it's really about tracking your time. It's really about making your focus time more focused and productivity, basically. The third thing is a calendar app that is called Amy. And I will soon write an article about it because I like it so much, but it's just not to spoil anything. It's probably the best calendar app that I've used in my life.
What's one design resource that you find yourself going back to over and over?
Growth at Design. Literally growth at Design. I took their course, I took whatever thing that they're selling on their website. I'm also lucky enough to have a good relationship with two of their founders. They're lovely people, and like the case studies that they have of the psychology patterns that they have on their website is something that I constantly go back again and again to get inspired.
Okay, and I love that. Growth at Design, definitely recommend. If you're not yet familiar with them, you should if you're listening to this show. So 3 books that you'd like to recommend.
Well, I've read a lot of books, so it's a tough decision for me to pick them. One is Design Sprint, which is actually a book that inspired me to become a designer. And all the authors over there and all the people that adopted Design Sprint in the beginning are also all my mentors that inspired me to become a designer. So Design Sprint, highly recommend. It's about a workshop that I think was originally initiated in Google that helps you to solve a problem from 0 to 1. So to shipping the product and test the product in a week. And if you are a product person, if you're a designer person, or even an engineer, and if you want to work with your team to really ship out something within a week, I think I'd recommend Design Sprint. The second thing is The Write It from Alberto Savoia, where in the book he introduced a concept that is called prototyping, which is pre-prototyping. So prototyping is already about testing a concept, right? But pre-prototyping, it's even testing a concept before you already have a prototype. And in the book, he mentioned a lot about how to fake your idea in a way that you can gather your data, right? So let's say you have an idea to build a product to solve like a specific problem, right? Instead of spending time into designing it, implement it, and then ship it, which will probably take at minimum a few weeks, right, to a few years, depending on the scale. One of the experiment that they had in the book is the fake door experiment, where you basically just have a landing page and then you just basically say you're solving this problem, right? And then you let people sign up, and then you observe how many people are actually signing up for it. Because if nobody is interested, there's no point that you need to build a product, right? And I think that really aligns with growth design mindset as well, where like a lot of time growth design is all about experimentation and trying to lower down your effort as much as possible and try to get as many data as possible, right? And the book is really a good resource for you to learn what are the different experimentation methods over there. The last one that it's a little bit irrelevant to everything that I spoke, but I think it's a cute book and something that I like, is a book called Invent to Learn, which is actually a book for teachers to teach students and to create a psychological safety space for children to create stuff, to invent stuff. And in most of the cases, it's about how you can motivate your students, your children's, to create something from Lego sets or from something, right? To tinker stuff. But I really like the book because I think a lot of stuff that the book mentioned is actually relevant to an adult environment as well. Where in the working environment, we also want to create space for people to invent stuff, to create stuff. And we also want to create psychological safety for people to feel safe and to say stuff, right? And there are just a lot of tips in the books that tell you how you can create an environment and how environment matters to help you create a safe space for everyone in the room.
I love that. I really, really love that. And I think as a mom, my brain is like, oh, okay, I probably would go pick up a copy of that. So, what profession will you be in if you were not a designer? And we're going to take out your developer experience too. Something else.
Okay. A baseball player. I
Ooh.
was really, really into baseball when I was a kid, and I used to live in Panama in Central America for 5 years, and I was really addicted to baseball when I was there. So I will probably become a baseball player if I don't have access to a laptop at that time.
Interesting.
Okay, that's very interesting. Love it. All right, favorite food and your favorite movie?
Favorite food? Well, I am a Taiwanese, and one of the most popular food in Taiwan is probably bubble tea. So that is still, yeah, exactly. So that is probably still my favorite food. I don't think there is good bubble tea over here in Netherlands, so that's why I'm like miss it a lot. And that favorite movie, it's a little bit controversial. Or like maybe not many people heard of it, but it's a movie called Baby Blocker, where actually I have a background, or a poster on my background. It's a Korean movie played by basically my favorite actors, and directed by my favorite director as well. So I won't
Lots
spoil
of
anything, but I highly recommend.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been fantastic speaking with you, and we'll see you on the next episode, everyone. Bye.
All right, bye guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.